There's things that women can do to get more out of the ketogenic lifestyle, right? It's not just about body composition. What if you want to get more out of hormonal response? What if you want to get more out of insulin sensitivity? All these things. So let's go ahead and let's dive in and break them down. The first thing that I do want to address overall, though, is there's a lot of people out there that are still saying that the ketogenic diet isn't good for women because women have a more fragile hormonal state they have to deal with, and therefore it's not as good. Well, there's just a study that published in journal Nutrients, and this looked at what is called the EMAS Sexual Function Questionnaire. Sounds kind of funny, but what this looked at was like kind of a holistic, full spectrum thing, like body composition, along with like libido, sexual function, all of this. And it took a look at 20 obese subjects, 12 of which were women, okay? And it had them go keto for 4 months and monitor a lot of just how they felt. Well, the women that went keto ended up having pretty significant improvements in their sexual function and their libido, and that was correlated directly with their level of ketosis. The deeper they were in ketosis, the better their sexual function was, and the better their libido was, and ultimately the better their body composition results were. So my point in saying that is that keto is not just for men. It absolutely works for women. When you start looking at subjective stuff where there's questionnaires, it just tells you a lot, right? If women are feeling better doing keto and their bodies are responding and their libido is good, that's usually an indicator that things are in pretty good harmony. Anyhow, let's get to the tips. The first one is focusing on insulin sensitivity, okay? Now, the reason that I say this, it's kind of a broad blanket statement, but if you focus just on like counting carbs and this and that, you're gonna get somewhere and you'll get an improvement in body composition, but we have to look at the big picture here. Okay, when you look at PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, it's not just for people that are diagnosed with that. There is a bigger picture that is coming to light with that. Over 50% of people with PCOS are insulin resistant. Now, that could somewhat imply that insulin resistance and PCOS are very connected, right? Well, there are a lot more people with insulin resistance than people with PCOS. So maybe there's just not a lot of people getting diagnosed with it. So we do have to really look at that big equation. And I think that if you focus on insulin resistance and you focus on improving insulin sensitivity, you really can get more out of the ketogenic lifestyle as just a lifestyle is concerned. So one of the ways that you can do that is by, believe it or not, adding pistachios in. There's a relatively new study that was published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition that found that literally just a small amount, 57 grams of pistachios per day for 4 months, triggered a dramatic improvement in insulin sensitivity. And it did so by affecting what is called microRNA, which kind of affects the epigenetic control. So what that means is it allowed specific genes to be expressed that improved and affected insulin sensitivity. So at a genetic level, pistachios are having an effect on insulin sensitivity. Now, is that going to improve PCOS? I mean, I'm not going to say that it cures or treats anything, but if you start indirectly looking at things, it makes some sense, right? Now, additionally, pistachios are pretty high carb in the world of nuts, so you wouldn't want to consume a ton of them, but they are also one of the higher fiber nuts, so that kind of cancels out. And realistically, you only need 50, 60 grams of them, which is not enough to kick you out of ketosis, so you're totally good. So consider maybe using some pistachios to like crust chicken or crust fish, or just get creative with it. So it seems like kind of a no-brainer to start adding that into the mix if you're a woman. The next one is consuming more fish over red meat. And I'm not saying that red meat is bad here, I'm just looking at some of the evidence. The British Journal of Nutrition had published a paper that took a look at 25 women that were in a normal, healthy state. Okay, so normal glucose, normal lipid panels, everything like that. Okay, and it had them go on a narrowly prescribed diet for 8 weeks. One group consumed oily fish, one group consumed red meat. Okay, that was really the only difference. Very simple. The oily fish group ended up having an improvement in, once again, insulin sensitivity versus the red meat group. Again, it's not to say that red meat is bad. It's just to say that probably the omega-3s were improving insulin sensitivity at some rate. So it is well worth kind of going down that direction if it's something that you can do. Next one, I want to jump over to menopause for a second. Now, you can skip through this section if you want, but I think it's important for everyone to be paying attention to, regardless of age. Okay, ghrelin is a big piece when it comes down to helping out menopause, when it helps the cravings and some of the weird things that are associated with menopause. So improving your ghrelin levels so that you don't have this constant hunger response is something that you can be paying attention to. Well, there are some studies that demonstrate that, of course, the ketogenic diet is good for ghrelin levels and suppressing suppressing hunger. But additionally, they've also found that adding soup into the mix, simply because of how it satiates you, can suppress ghrelin levels. Now, ghrelin is elevated through menopause, so if we can adjust this a little bit, it can play a pretty big role. Another thing in the world of insulin sensitivity that women may want to kind of factor in is as you get closer to that luteal phase of your cycle, the progesterone phase, it is very natural for you to get more hungry, and it is very natural for you to crave sweets. That is a progesterone response. And there is a study that was published in the journal Metabolism that demonstrated that progesterone has those metabolic functions as well. They're not just reproductive. So it's normal for you to get cravings. It's normal for you to feel hungry. It's normal for you to feel irritable. It's just how it kind of works. So one of the things as a lifestyle technique that I would recommend is have things that are lower carb but still sweet on hand. Okay, it's going to give you something to lean into so you're not going to go off the bandwagon. Because what you don't want to do is have even those little smidgets of sweet chocolate with sugar. Okay, that's going to put you into that gray area where you're not going to be in ketosis, but you're almost in it. And then you're sitting in this gray area where your body's bouncing back and forth, and you're not getting the benefits of either. You're not getting the benefits of being in ketosis because you're shallowly knocking yourself out. So I would usually recommend having something kind of sweet. I put a link down below for one of the sweet treats that I would recommend. It's called Perfect Keto. They've got a number of different things. They've got collagen, they've got bars, they've got cookies. So I figure in this case, I'll link out to their cookies, which I think are just a good thing to have on hand. They're sweetened with allulose, and allulose is a really interesting sweetener where it actually utilizes the same glucose transporter as regular glucose. So instead of your body transporting sugar, it's transporting allulose, which is pretty fascinating. So if you're doing keto, it's a really interesting compound, really interesting cookie. And they have a bunch of different flavors ranging from, chocolate brownie to peanut butter to all kinds of different things. Snickerdoodle is one of my favorites. So I put a link down below. There's a special discount if you want to check them out. So again, that link is down below in the description. They're a big sponsor and supporter of this channel, and it works perfect if you're doing keto, man or woman, really. But that link is down below in the description, so check them out after this video. This next one is really important, and this is relatively newer research that we're seeing, and that is how important sodium becomes for people that are doing keto, especially women when we're starting to look at various hormones, right? So there's a study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that demonstrated that when someone starts keto, in this particular case it was a very low calorie ketogenic diet, they have a pretty decent decrease in sodium. In fact, it's quite a lot, right? So if they compared a mixed diet to a low carb diet with the same amount of calories, the low carb diet lost a lot more sodium. Well, when we lose more sodium, it can trigger a few other things. In this particular study, they noted that there was an increase in serum cortisol levels. What we don't want is chronically high serum cortisol levels. We do not want that. That is something that can trigger higher levels of visceral fat. It's things that can trigger all kinds of negative issues. It's the stress hormone. So when we're doing keto, we want to try to get our sodium intake up for multiple reasons, right? Electrolyte function, like contractile strength, but also because of the modulation of cortisol within our blood. There's also a study that was published in the journal Drugs and Dermatology that found that high circulating levels of cortisol were also associated with hair loss, which is not something that we want. So sometimes women will mention that there's a concern about ketosis and hair loss. Well, this could be the connection. We're starting to connect the dots here. Is it a sodium thing? Our sodium value is not where they should be. Should we bring the sodium intake up a little bit? You see, what happens specifically when you first start keto is you lose a whole lot of water. Now, I talk about low levels of insulin and how your kidneys expel extra water during keto. Yes, that's all true, and you lose minerals and electrolytes. But when you first start keto, it's really exacerbated, because what happens is you have a bunch of liver glycogen, and that liver glycogen, those carbohydrates, they bind to water. So as you are using up those liver glycogen stores, it's binding to water, and you're losing that water along with electrolytes. So in the very beginning, it is definitely exacerbated the amount of sodium that you lose, and becomes even more important to replenish it. Well, there's a study that was published in the journal Metabolism that shed some good news. It showed that a well-formulated ketogenic diet with adequate amounts of sodium did not have a negative effect on serum cortisol levels. So that means if we do add the sodium in, we can keep the cortisol at bay a little bit. So you might be wondering how much sodium. That's going to largely be dependent on who you are and your lifestyle and how active you are. But the bottom line is, and take this with a grain of salt, no pun intended, you're better off to have a little bit extra, especially if you're active, especially because that's going to at least give you that buffer. Remember, when you're lower levels of insulin, you're losing a lot more of those electrolytes. And I would rather see you have a little bit extra salt when you salt your chicken or salt your fish or anything like that than end up deficient in it. The other interesting thing is that this study that was published in Journal Metabolism, that same one, showed that sodium levels will positively influence our levels of T3. So when you go onto keto, sometimes you'll notice a drop in your thyroid levels, your T3 hormone. That's pretty normal because some thyroid is associated with glucose metabolism and just the energy expenditure there. But if sodium levels are elevated or where they should be, you don't seem to have that decline in T3 that you might see otherwise. The next and last one that I want to talk about is implementing Spearmint Herbal Tea. This sounds kind of funny, but this comes from some relatively newer research that shows the effect of spearmint tea on testosterone levels in women. You see, with PCOS, again, with just hormonal imbalance, and I'm kind of using PCOS as somewhat of a blanket term for hormonal imbalance, if you catch my drift, but with PCOS, a lot of times you see an increase in testosterone levels. That's kind of what happens, an imbalance in hormones where testosterone levels are higher than they should be for women. Well, spearmint tea seemed to reduce those testosterone levels. In this particular case, they gave spearmint tea twice a month for 1 month, and they noticed that, again, it decreased their testosterone levels, but more importantly, decreased the symptoms of PCOS as well. So you factor this in along with the benefit that you're getting in terms of insulin sensitivity by doing keto, along with some spearmint tea, yeah, you might be able to find that you're actually regulating yourself a little bit more. So hopefully these tips will give you a little bit of something so you can get a bit more out of your ketogenic lifestyle. I'll see you tomorrow.